Evening. Welcome once again to the Tzemach Bible Institute program. I'm John Klein, and with me, as usual, is Ken Garrison, pastor of Fellowship Church and founder of the Tzemach Bible Institute. Good evening, Ken.
Good evening, John.
Ken, we hear a lot about the pollution today and global warming. The question is, will man destroy itself, destroy the world by pollution, or will it come by atomic blast through Iran, or just what is happening?
Well, John, I think if we really consider the human community and the history of the human community, if left to its own, it probably would sooner or later destroy itself. However, that is part of the real beauty of the Bible. And prophecy in the Bible, because it gives us a very clear picture that God puts limits upon the activities of mankind, and that He will intervene indeed to prevent annihilation of the race and the destruction of the planet. So God has.
The Bible actually addresses the future of the world.
Absolutely, and draws us, I think, a very, very straightforward picture of that. And that then becomes the basis of real hope. Paul wrote that if we have hope only in this life, then we're the worst of fools. And so we have to look beyond, and that's what we're going to do today with our view of prophecy. For the past several weeks, we've been looking at a number of areas, topics of Bible prophecy. Actually, if you consider most Bible prophecy writers, they only look at very, very limited subject area in the more general sense of Bible prophecy. They might, for example, be looking at trying to identify a specific person of Antichrist, or they might, for example, be speaking of a one world government. We just had the Olympics recently, and actually you can see the makings of a global community in that. So that's popular in Bible prophecy. But when we look in a much broader sense, we see a number of topics of Bible prophecy, including the ingathering of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, the Messiah, the coming of Messiah, and God's breakthrough of His presence in the midst of Jerusalem, and ultimately the judgment of the nations. Now, the final area that we want to address has to do with the new creation, and we would say that those first four areas actually dovetail in fulfillment, bringing us to that final area.
Okay, and what we find then is that many prophets in the Hebrew Scriptures address this, look forward to this, and talk about things in the new creation. And so that's what we are going to consider in today's program, the final of the five legs of Bible prophecy, the new creation, which should serve to give us all great hope, because all the scriptures have been fulfilled or are being fulfilled, and so we have hope that this will
absolutely.
Too.
So now, in order to, we often talk about the process of redemption, and in order to get a concept of what the end product may be, then we back up to the initial state, or the initial creation state of creation, recorded in the first three chapters of the Bible. We have a very brief glimpse there of the condition that existed in the earth before the fall of man, and the redemption process will ultimately bring us back to some of the conditions that existed then. So we want to consider that.
All right. So the Bible gives this picture. God created everything, and He was the singular authority over His whole creation. And man communed with God, and man was given the responsibility of being the steward over God's creation. And so that's how it existed before the fall, Ken.
All right.
And since the fall, things have been going, we might say, downhill.
Okay, it has absolutely been going downhill. In fact, if we look at Psalms 8, we see something of a picture of man's created position. We believe that in the initial creation that man was a conduit that stood between God himself in the heavenly realm and the earth itself, the created physical realm, and all the various species and so on. And Psalms 8 says that all of these were placed under man, and of course that's how he functioned. Now in the fall. Now, by the way, as long as man obeyed God, that is, stayed under that singular authority of God, then this condition was eternal.
And the earth and all of creation was blessed because
God's blessing and presence was able to flow into that. Now with the fall, with man breaking that relationship with God, having been driven out of the garden, as we see in the Genesis account, then we enter into our present age. And by the way, everything that we have been experiencing in the present age is characterized not by life or the presence of God, but by death. Everything we know is in the process of death, of dying. And that's the characteristic of the present age.
So all of that blessing, that it was actually lost or disturbed in the fall.
Absolutely. And everything that we experience in this present age was pretty much set into motion with the fall,
a curse on the earth.
That's right, and that's what referred to. Use the word curse. The Bible uses the word the curse, and that really is it. And so that is the condition. Now, Paul actually writes about that and describes that somewhat.
Paul writing about it and summarizing what the prophets wrote. We're going to look at some of the prophets. We'll look at Paul first. And Paul talks about all of nature groaning for this restoration, looking for the manifestation of the sons of God, the revealing of the sons of God, which will be the complete restoration, our bodies and the whole earth.
Creation is groaning because this death thing has been imposed upon them through the disobedience of man.
Right, and somehow creation is looking forward to the redemption.
Amen.
Okay, let's look at Romans 8, and we'll start off in verse 20. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from the slavery to corruption into freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. And not only that, but it says, we ourselves groan and look for the redemption of our bodies, which will come at the coming of the Lord.
All right. So again,
this process is going to be stopped. Of destruction.
All right, and it will be stopped. Now, the process, we speak often about the process of redemption. It will be stopped by the intervention of God himself. Right. It won't be stopped by the work of man. And there's a Greens movement today that takes into account the groaning and the travail of the creation. But the Greens movement today, even though they may reestablish some sense of stewardship, are totally inadequate to solve the problem. Only God's intervention can possibly solve the problem. And the prophets, as we study the biblical picture of redemption and the words of the prophets, obviously the prophets saw God intervening and bringing forth this deliverance in the earth from this.
You know, I always wondered
curse.
about the Greens people. They're interested in the eagle or the whale, but deny the creator of all.
So the biblical picture would say that only intervention of God himself will actually accomplish that. Now, I'm not opposed to the green movement in a very general sense, because what they're doing in general is saying that man is has a responsibility as steward of the creation, and certainly that's biblical.
Right.
And so not all aspects of the green movement, just that they leave out God.
They leave out, and it will not be accomplished without
Right.
the hand of God. That's the idea.
Right.
Now let's look at, we'll start looking at Isaiah. Isaiah 65, verse 17. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall be remembered, or shall not be remembered, or come to mind. So God is in the process of doing something, and this is what we have to look forward to, not complete destruction.
Amen. Isaiah is one of the first of the Hebrew prophets. He prophesied about 750 years before the time of Jesus, and he effectively introduced all of these ideas of prophecy, or topics of prophecy, and he openly declares, ultimately we're going to a new creation, a new heaven, and a new earth. One of the characteristics that Isaiah saw in this new heaven and earth is recorded in Isaiah 60, that the energy source is God directly. In other words, the energy of life today, if we look at biology, the energy of life today is derived from the sun, or virtually all the energy is derived from the sun. I guess you could consider some minute portion of light coming from the stars in general, but basically the sun. And through photosynthesis in plants and whatever, we get the possibility of life. Life is tracked back to the sun. Now, in the new creation, the Bible draws a strange picture to us, really, that this energy of life is going to be derived directly from God's own being himself. And so that's an interesting aspect of this new creation. Now, you read earlier from Romans 8. The answer to Romans 8 is Isaiah chapter what, 11?
Yeah.
Read from Isaiah 11.
Here again, Isaiah saying nature. We said that Paul just summarized what the Hebrew prophets wrote. He was a rabbi, and certainly he knew the scriptures. So now let's go back to Isaiah 11, verse 6. We see that nature is being restored. And the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and the little boy will lead them. And the cow and the bear will graze, their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like an ox, and the nursing child will play by the hole of a cobra, and the weaned child will put his hands in the viper's den. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea.
See how bold Isaiah is in that statement.
That's quite a statement there.
Lion and the lamb grazing together, eating straw. Well, that tells us that carnivores as such appears to be eliminated in this
even
new creation.
Fear.
In other words, death is swallowed up.
Now, most people, and not all people, but most people are afraid of all snakes, not only the poisonous ones. Now you can imagine even the fear of that is gone.
Absolutely. Well, death is removed.
Death is removed.
That's the character. Again, we said that in this present age, our present age is characterized by death. Everything we see and experience is in the process of dying. And that's why creation is groaning in travail. Death is removed. Death is no longer an option in God's new creation.
Now, we talked about the new heaven and new earth. Ezekiel also sees the new Jerusalem. Let me read Ezekiel 48, verse 35. The city shall be 18,000 cubits round about, and the name of the city from that day on shall be, the Lord is there. Meaning God is there. And so that's nothing is degenerating in the presence of God.
Again, when we consider the prophetic picture, the Gnostic influence of Christianity has resulted in the picture in Christianity in general of at death we're going to go to heaven and live or exist in some heavenly realm with harps and clouds and halos, without much of a picture of what goes beyond. But the truth of the matter is, the Bible draws a very clear picture of God ultimately coming and dwelling in the midst of man on planet Earth. So much so that Ezekiel's picture of this new creation was the name of the city, the New Jerusalem, is Adonai Shema, meaning
God
the Lord is there.
Right. Hey, another thing that he talks about is this river of life flowing out, and John talks about it later. We'll look at it in the book of Revelation. He sees this flowing out from Jerusalem, actually from the presence of God again.
Absolutely.
Let's look at Ezekiel 47, verse 12. And by the river on its banks, on one side and on the other, there will grow all kinds of trees for food. Their leaves will not wither, and their fruit will not fail. They will bear every month, because the water flows from the sanctuary, and their fruit will be the fruit, and their leaves their fruit will be food, and their leaves for healing. And it's coming from the sanctuary. And who's in the sanctuary?
The Lord himself. Again, we're talking about the city where God is there, and this river of life is flowing out from the center of the presence of God. So over and over we see prophet after prophet speaking of this new creation, the ultimate thing that we're working toward, the redemption process completed. And God is the source of life, a river of life, flowing out from the very throne of God, from the city. And so we have a wonderful, beautiful picture of what this new creation is to be like. Now, again, prophet after prophet spoke about this. We want to look at the prophet Zechariah. In the latter chapters of the book of Zechariah, he also envisions this same thing and speaks of this new creation picture.
Right. And, we talked about the curse coming on the earth after the fall, and it says that in the Genesis account, in Zechariah 14, and in the end of the book of Revelation, the curse is removed. So John seeing the same thing that Zechariah saw, that Ezekiel saw, and that Isaiah saw.
Absolutely. Because in each of these cases, it just represents that this present age that is characterized by death comes to its end, and a new age is introduced, and death is not a part of it.
Well, that's certainly good news.
I think for all folks our age especially, that's good news.
Now let's look at Zechariah 14:8. And what do you mean, our age? Zechariah 14:8. And it will come about in that day, living waters will flow out of Jerusalem, half of them towards the eastern sea, and half towards the western sea, and it will be summer as well as winter. And the Lord will be king over all the earth in that day. The Lord will be the only one, and his name will be the only one, and the land will be changed into a plain. In other words, all of this is the same story of new heaven and new earth.
Absolutely.
New restoration, eternal life. Even the physical universe is preserved by God, and then there's a new creation
Absolutely.
on top of it. In verse 11 he concludes then, and the people will live in it, and there will be no more curse, for Jerusalem will dwell in security. Now, not only is Jerusalem going to dwell in security, remember, he's going to be Lord of Lords, King of Kings. So it starts in Jerusalem, will spread across the whole creation.
Every knee shall bow, every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So that tells us that in this state, everything is under God's authority, as it was in the garden. So that's why we see this picture of redemption or restoration.
And so we see in the book of Revelation, Revelation 21 and 22, that John sees all this, the new heaven and new earth, the river of life flowing out from Jerusalem, the trees blossoming every year for the healing of the nations, the fruit. And we have a graphic of it here. In the middle is the New Jerusalem, and by the yellow, where God's presence is. The pink is Israel surrounding. Every picture has Israel surrounding
the camp is always, just like it was in the wilderness,
God's presence.
God's presence
Build me
is
a
in the,
mikdash, a holy house, that I may dwell
right in the
amongst
midst
you.
of Israel, outside of
And
Israel.
so the new
then,
creation is going to be a picture. I mean, we see in the what happened in the wilderness. We see the new creation being that same.
So God has been telling this story of redemption for thousands of years, and it's sitting right in the scriptures. All we have to do is study to see it, and it's a beautiful picture. Now there is one other aspect of this picture that we can see. There is a chasm that is placed between this new creation that we see and what is referred to as the lake of fire. And this is the ultimate separation. Jesus said that the lake of fire was prepared for the devil and his angels. And in Revelation 21:8, we see the people that will actually, the characteristics that will actually, are people that will have their inheritance in the lake of fire. Effectively, those that make Satan Lord in their lifestyle. So there is a heaven and hell division in this.
So one part is just eternal blessing in the presence of God and life, and one part is, and Isaiah saw it, the burning hell and fire, brimstone. And then New Testament brings it out a little more fully. So there is every man is going to stand before God and give an account.
The picture was set before the time of Jesus, but Jesus and the early church were the ones that really developed the teaching really fairly fully in that regard. So when we're talking about the restoration of nature, we're not talking about universal salvation. Sometimes people hear this and they say, well, looks like universal salvation. We're not talking about universal salvation because, as John said from the book of Hebrews, it's appointed once for man to die, and after that comes judgment, and there's going to be a host of people. And perhaps if we looked in our communities today and the type of lifestyle that people lead, maybe even a vast majority of people in the present age that we see, because of their lifestyle, they're destined for the lake of fire.
Yeah, now that's God's judgment, not ours, but certainly we could see by somebody's lifestyle that they might be in some sort of trouble. Listen, it's pretty simple. Those that reject God in this age and choose to do it their way are in danger of being rejected by God in the age to come.
Absolutely.
Now, Paul talked about that God put all things in 1 Corinthians 15, all things under Jesus' feet, except himself. And then when all things are under Jesus' feet, Jesus will take all those things, put them under God's feet, himself included, that God may be all in all. John in the book of Revelation writes, the kingdom of this world has become the kingdom of our God and his Messiah. I already read that Zechariah 14:9, that God will be the only authority in that day. Who is God? The God of the Bible. He identifies himself at the burning bush as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He identifies himself in Acts 3 with the first miracle of the church. Peter says, the God of our fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. He has anointed his servant Jesus. So we talk about a God, but God has a memorial name that he likes to be called.
Right. I wanted to point that God specifically instructs us in Genesis 3, that by this name he will be known throughout generations. So when we speak of God, we shouldn't generalize that very much. We should go back to what God himself said, that we specifically identify him with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the Bible. Every other God is an idol. This is the Holy One of Israel.
Remember, your hope, it's great to have a hope, but it also matters what your hope is in. If your hope is in mankind or science or the Greens people, and we're not against Greens people, you heard Ken saying that if your hope is in them and them alone, your hope is in vain. But our hope is in what God's doing.
Right. Redemption is not a bootstrap operation. Redemption absolutely requires the intervention of God. And the Bible draws us a very clear picture that he has intervened in the past, he is intervening presently, and he will intervene in the future to accomplish his redemption purpose. Some of the things that are included in that, as John read, is a singular authority over all of mankind. Secondly, God is coming to move in the planet Earth in the midst of the human community. He will dwell here and in the midst of us. And concerning the curse, what did you say?
The curse is going to be removed. Let me read Revelation 22, 1 to 3.
No more death.
No more death.
By the way, and John likes for me to comment on this, in physics, this death characterization of this present age is basically referred to as the second law of thermodynamics. And so the ever-presence of an eternal and infinite source of energy, which is God himself, will overcome the second law of thermodynamics. And so that's going to be the reversal, no death.
Right. I won't read, we're running out of time, I won't read Revelation 22, 1 to 3. It's a restatement of the other scriptures that I read. A new heaven and new earth, or the river of life flowing from the throne of God. We see also in the scriptures that the Dead Sea, and by the way, you can come with me soon. I'm taking a group up to Israel in March of 2009. The Dead Sea, where nothing could live, will have fish living in there, will be a great source of life. And that's coming from the throne of God. Redemption, Ken. That's what God's in, the redemption business.
Okay, that's the picture of the new creation. We introduced over the past few weeks several areas or topics, actually 5 of Bible prophecy. We said that the first 4 are working concurrently and will be fulfilled, dovetailed together in their fulfillment, which ultimately then leads to the 5th of the new creation. We would like to challenge you to come out on September the 2nd, on Tuesday night. We'll have registration for our new course of study through the Bible at the Zamok Institute. Come out and get involved in the study of the Scriptures. There is absolutely nothing that can take the place of a good systematic study of the Bible from beginning to end to get a picture of this process that we've been talking about tonight. So come out and get involved. It's never too late to start beginning to study through the Scriptures and build this foundation.
All right. So that's our program for this evening. Shalom.